Anthony.
Hi, Debbie.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be speaking to you again. The last time we spoke was for Skin.
Wow. That's exciting. I love people who I can reconnect with in this way.
I loved that movie so much, Anthony. So I found Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, an interesting film for you to direct. But I have to tell you, sir, this is pure enchantment. It is spectacular, a magical delight. I am in love with what you've done with Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris.
Oh, thank you so much. Did you see the parallels between Skin and Mrs. Harris?
I did. You've got contrast happening. You've got class situations happening. What I also noticed, because I was a big fan of the Mrs. Harris books, all 4 of them, you have beefed up and actually contemporized a bit some of the social issues that we now have today that you capture beautifully in this post-World War II era as well. So,
oh, thank you.
You have so much happening here, and you really beef up the characters and their backstories in the film.
That was super important for us to do with this adaptation because Gallico doesn't really give you enough.
No.
It's quite superficial. He sets the scene and he gives you the bare bones and the basics for the characters, but we had to do a lot of work on backstories to give it that richness. And I'm really glad that you picked up on some of the layers, like the workers' rights element, which gives her quite a lot of backbone, doesn't it?
It surely does. It's funny because I loved the 1992 telemovie that Anthony Shaw did with directing his mother, Angela Lansbury, in Mrs. Arris Goes to Paris. And that was so charming. I thought, oh God, I hope Anthony doesn't screw this one up. And you surpassed it so much, and you gave it so much more richness. The TV version from 92, they never really developed the backstories there. So this is really fresh and exciting, what you've done.
Oh, I'm so pleased, and I'm so delighted that you have such a deep knowledge of the material so that you can really see what we did with it.
I'm disappointed you didn't do Mrs. Harris Goes to Moscow, quite honestly. But
well, what makes you think I'm not going to do it?
I'll be first in line if you do, Anthony.
Trust me, this franchise is already starting. The discussions are already starting. And, if this film becomes a success, you'll be seeing all 3 remaining books made.
That would just make my lifetime. I mean, this is I love books that are translated and adapted to the big screen, but that are done well. And you have done this so well. And
thank you.
And so much of this, Anthony, and this is what does not surprise me, is your attention to detail with your department heads, with Luciana on the production design. Luciana is amazing with period pieces. What she did for Ben Lewin with Catcher Was a Spy was outstanding for that World War II period.
Yeah. And
you jump in with Felix as your cinematographer. Everything in this film is about contrast. You have Ada Harris, she wears tiny little floral prints in her clothes. There's some floral in the wallpaper in her house. You go to Paris and the floral disappears except in real flowers. Even the walkway to her home, which is bright, whereas the interior is darker. Talk to me about developing this visual tonal bandwidth that really is married so well with the emotional tonal bandwidth.
Well, you are absolutely 100% correct in this observation. I wanted to create 2 very different worlds between London and Paris. And so we worked hard between Lucci, Jenny Bevan and I, and the cameraman, to create these 2 distinct worlds. And you're right to pick up on the flowers. That was something that Christian Dior himself had a passion for, both real and in prints. In fact, his sister, Catherine Dior, took over the perfume side of the business and grew the roses and the lavender that went into the Dior perfumes on behalf of Christian Dior. So flowers are an enormously important detail that stems from Dior himself. Mm-hmm. But what we decided was that the two worlds had to have very distinct color palettes, and that London had to be more drab, so that Paris becomes this glorious revelation when she actually gets there. And part of the way we achieved that was by restricting the palette in London to grays, greens, browns, muted tones, and then making Paris sharper and more defined, black, white, more primary colors, stronger colors, and we played with the grading as well to emphasize the difference between those two worlds. So there is more vibrancy in Paris, and more sharpness, more clarity. Mm-hmm. In fact, Christian Dior's office is the only interior that has any kind of pattern in it. Mm-hmm. Again, flowers, but very different, and a French wallpaper. As you say, Luciana Righi is such a stunning, iconic designer herself, and with such a knowledge of both the French and the English worlds, because she's lived, like me, she has lived both in London and Paris, mm-hmm. which is why she was really the perfect designer for this movie. And so for London, she chose these William Morris wallpapers, which were just perfect for her interior, without being remotely too grand. That was my biggest concern, not to make Ada's flat. If you remember the Angela Lansbury film, she had a very middle-class flat that she was living in.
Very much so.
Far too pretty and nice. And I kept saying to Lucci, make it dirtier, make it darker. Make it dingier, because we didn't want to make it pretty and middle class. And she's busy cleaning everyone else's houses. She doesn't have time to repaint her own. So that was a big factor. And then you very cleverly mentioned this idea of what she wears in her blouse and what's in the wallpaper. That was something that, for me, was inspired by Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which was a big influence for me making this film. Mm-hmm. And if you remember, in Umbrellas of Cherbourg, they had this outrageous thing of these very, very strong colors and wallpapers that were immediately echoed in the costumes in shocking and surprising ways. And we took that idea and made it much, much more subtle. So, you've got print on print. You have Ada's print blouse with a print apron that she wears, and the colors are sort of complementary to each other. And then you've got the flowers in the background. So there was an attempt to do this, but in perhaps a slightly more subtle and less 60s way, more 50s, less shocking, less crazy.
You really feel the post-war, late 40s, early 50s. The 50s really come to life in Paris, especially with the all-white atelier salon, and it's a canvas. And Ada walks in there, and she's stripped down to her slip, which is white. She then becomes the canvas for Dior's seamstresses to work on. And this is where Jenny's work is just, I was gobsmacked, Anthony, gobsmacked. To pick the new Dior look of the 50s with the nipped-in waist on everything, that was such a transformative fashion statement that Dior did. And I swear, it could have been Audrey Hepburn walking just out of a movie with every fashion that Jenny brought to life. Just stunning.
Well, it's
stunning.
Funny. You hit directly on the reference. So we based Alba's look entirely on Audrey Hepburn. You'll notice her hairstyles are all Audrey. Mm-hmm. I studied funny face before making this film. That had a lot to do with the color palette in Paris as well as the choreography of the camera, which was based on musicals. So Umbrella's funny face, My Fair Lady, I really looked at the way the camera was used in those movies and tried to do my own updated version of that, if you like.
Well, you really succeed in it. With the fashion show, you really feel that lyricism. And what you and Felix also do is the deeper we get into the fashion show and the deeper and more mesmerizing it is to Ada, the camera goes in tighter on the clothing. Of course, the color palette of the fashions intensifies as the fashion show goes on, till we get to the stunning Venus and then the temptation dresses.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Jenny and I spent a lot of time discussing the color journey of that fashion show. So it had to achieve many things. It had to, because it was the 10th anniversary collection, it had to be a summation of his oeuvre across that decade, as well as concentrate on 1957, which is the year that the film takes place. And then, so it had to, and then there is a progression in the original Dior shows from day wear to cocktail dresses to evening gowns, which has a natural build of drama. So we just literally recreated what was done historically in that, and it works.
Oh.
And then, of course, every show ended with a wedding dress. And it didn't occur to me until I actually was in the editing room, the emotional impact of that wedding dress at the end of the scene, because you have this extraordinary look between Natasha and Ada when she's wearing the wedding dress. And because the film is so much about igniting love again and becoming open to love again, there's something so romantic and beautiful about her in the wedding dress, nodding to Ada and giving her permission to consider the possibility of another relationship.
Oh, I mean,
hope that's not too much of an exaggeration.
No.
But I do think that there's something about that wedding dress that really is both the emotional climax and the romantic climax of that show.
The camera captures Alba's face perfectly with that nod to "it's okay." And of course, we've got Ada playing fairy godmother to Natasha and Andre. It's just so beautifully done, Anthony. Beautifully, visually choreographed. I know they're going to cut us off here in a minute, but I would be remiss not to ask you about the score, Rael Jones' score. This is from the very first notes. We feel whimsical. It's flighty, it's light, it's playful. The instrumentation even is very light. I am in love with the score. And then the contrast with the music when we get a jazz sequence or the Paris Cabaret. So I'm curious what kind of discussions and thoughts you had about what you were looking for musically.
I just love talking to you because you're so smart about these things, and it's just such a joy. Look, you hit on all the key points. I wanted a score that was going to reflect the whimsy of the film, but not direct the emotion too much. So I was always asking the composer to work within an ambiguous palette and an ambiguous chord progression. He listened a lot to French music and what are the keys that the French use the most, Debussy and Ravel. What are the tempi? What are the chords that are particularly French? So that emphasized the Frenchness of the French section. And so the Marquis has his own theme, which is very Michel Legrand in a way. And then the use of instruments, we do have different instruments that represent different moods or characters, and we have solo flute, we have solo clarinet, we have solo piano a lot. Well, that's mostly Ada is the solo piano, but the flute is also really instrumental in this score. And then there are the jazz elements, because I wanted to bring a modernity to the story. I didn't want it to feel too old-fashioned, and there's something wonderful about jazz, which is that it's both period and modern at the same time, because it is quite a radical musical form. And so I don't know if you noticed, but in the dinner between Natasha, Ada, and Andre, the first dinner in his flat, there's this Miles Davis type track that's playing, which was a kind of sound-alike with the trumpet. And then, of course, there's the big band sound of the finale.
At the Legion Hall, yes.
Those pub scenes. Not to mention the cabaret, where you have burlesque, as well as a kind of nod to Peter and the Wolf for the wolves in sheep's clothing. So it was an enormously varied score and a very challenging one, but Rael Jones is absolutely brilliant. He's one of those young discoveries who's had a few breaks, but I think this is really the one where he's going to truly shine and be heard properly for the first time.
This is the one that will put Rael on the map. I have no doubt. No doubt.
Time we have. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Oh, okay. Bye, Anthony.
Sorry.
I hope we get to do this again.
Me too. Love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.